So Dubai and the UAE is obviously a popular jurisdiction to set up companies because it gives you access to the United Arab Emirates and Dubai to benefit from the low taxes, the networking, the generally growing and improving environment, the weather, lifestyle, everything like that. But another reason why a lot of people are setting up UAE and Dubai companies is to use this company to travel around the world and potentially pay legally 0% taxes. However, doing this properly and legally is actually a lot more complicated than you might think. So in this video, I'm gonna give you a full guide on how to actually properly and legally use a Dubai and UAE company structure to pay zero taxes on at the corporate and personal level while traveling around the world, slash being a digital nomad, slash perhaps having a couple of bases around the world. Let's say you wanna have like 2 to 3 homes around the world, like what is my goal personally, and use this Dubai company as your business structure while living around the world. How can you legally not have to pay taxes in these countries where you actually spend time? Before we start, my name is Thomas. I'm an expat and a business owner who's been living and running a business in Dubai for the past 2 years. On this channel, my goal is to give you everything that you need to know about relocating to Dubai, setting up a company in Dubai, as well as living around the world and using different business structures to optimize your taxes while building your dream lifestyle. I also work with a team from a company called GenZone with whom we've set up over 500 companies in Dubai. What we do essentially is an all-in-one package where we first help you exit the tax system of your home country. We connect you to the best tax professionals wherever you're from, and then we set up your company for you in Dubai and get your residence permit fully legally without you having to essentially do anything. So if you're interested in that service, you can book a free consultation with one of my team members in the first link down below in the description. However, with the volume that we're getting right now, I mean, GenZone, the award of being the fastest growing Dubai startup company in the entire market, we simply cannot handle the volume we have. So we have to increase our prices very, very soon. For now, however, you can still get the price that is listed down below. So if you're interested, I recommend moving forward as quickly as you can so that you can benefit from that lower price. First, there's a couple of things that you need to understand that most people completely ignore. So in general, anytime you do any kind of work, like you do any kind of business in any country, that country may have a right to tax that income. Most commonly, that most people will understand is that if you become a tax resident in some other country, it doesn't matter if your company is in the UAE, that country will then have the right to tax your worldwide income, and most likely then because your company is managed and controlled from there, that company will also become tax resident there. What most people don't realize, and what I haven't really covered in too much detail on this channel yet, is that even if you're not a tax resident in some country, that country may still tax your company and yourself personally. So in this video, we'll go through exactly how you can legally manage all of this to not have any tax liability. Obviously, you have many people who do this. They go and live in Bali for the entire year sometimes, and they just don't pay taxes, even though they're supposed to, where they're just like, well, they'll never catch me, which is obviously never a good idea in the long term. By the way, a lot of this is going to be ambiguous. A lot of this is going to depend exactly on where you spend time, things like this. And this video is not tax advice. I'm not tax advisor. I'm just some guy who's done a lot of research, and this is my interpretation of the situation, but you should absolutely not listen to anything I say because I have no idea what I'm talking about. With that said, let's get started. So just step 1 is to form your company. So in most cases, the reason why the UAE is a very good jurisdiction for this is because the UAE gives you access to a 0% tax residence for yourself personally very, very easily. So if you set up a UAE company, the big benefit that you get is that you can then relocate to Dubai, get a UAE residence permit. And this is going to be very, very useful. I've talked about before that there might be some cases where you can be just like a perpetual traveler where you don't have a tax residence anywhere, but in practice becomes difficult. Firstly, because you need to answer the question of, okay, where are you going to have banking? If you live 5 months in Thailand, 5 months in Indonesia, chances are you're not going to be able to open bank accounts in either of those countries. Now, if you're very wealthy, you can often open non-resident accounts in many countries like Singapore, but they're going to require minimum deposits of like $300,000 or something like that. So if you're not willing to do that, you kind of need to have a residence permit somewhere in order to get a bank account in that country, and the UAE gives you that. Obviously, there's many other options. You can set up a USLC, you can set up a Hong Kong company, but often with those companies, you don't get residence in that country. You're not going to get personal banking for yourself. So this is really why the UAE is a good option. Gives you a very simple and easy residence as well as a tax residence. Now, the one downside of a UAE company is that the UAE does have a 9% corporate tax, but it only applies for companies that are not treated as what's called a small business. So essentially, if you make below 3 million dirhams a year, you're treated as a small business and you get access to what's called the small business exemptions. So your company pays 0% taxes legally. If you make above that in revenue, then you're going to have to pay 9% on your profits, and you're going to have to pay that 9% regardless of whether you actually run that company from the UAE. So that is the downside. So if you do need to pay that 9% tax, if you are able to get that banking somewhere else, there might be cases where something like a Hong Kong company where you can get 0% tax with the offshore exemption, a US LLC or something like that might be a great option. So you don't have to pay corporate taxes in the country of registration like you would with the UA company. Your step number 2 is to not trigger tax residence anywhere else. So you need to look at the tax residence rules of whatever country you should spend time in. If you're in, let's say, Southeast Asia and a lot of developing countries, although most of the time it's going to be a simple days test of like, okay, if you spend more than 183 days in the country, you're a tax resident. If not, then you're not a tax resident. Very, very simple and easy. What you want to do, however, is avoid ideally any Western countries, because in a lot of Western countries, they have more ways to trap you into the tax systems, but this isn't actually enough, because step number 3 is that you need to make sure you don't trigger taxable local sourced income. And this is actually one of the most misunderstood topics in the whole international taxation space. Almost no one understands what local sourced income actually means. There will be so many cases. For example, we'll use the example of Thailand because it's a very popular country. Thailand has this sort of remittance-based taxation system where Thailand will only tax income that is remitted, so like brought into the country. So if you like take money out of an ATM, you pay with a credit card in Thailand, you bring money into a Thai bank account, but that only applies to foreign sourced income. So what many people will think is that you can just have a foreign company, pay yourself to a foreign bank account from a foreign company, and that will be foreign sourced income. But that is absolutely not how it works. If you perform work in Thailand or in any country, almost always the income from the work that you perform in that country will be treated as local sourced income. And it doesn't matter if it's from a foreign company, it doesn't matter if it's paid to a foreign bank account, if the actual work is performed in the country, that is going to constitute local sourced income. And even if you're not a tax resident in the country like Thailand, Thailand is going to tax all Thai sourced income. So this is where many people get tripped up. However, this is where having that tax residence in a place like the UAE becomes useful. Why? Because a lot of countries are going to have double tax agreements that essentially limit this right of the country where you spend time to tax that local sourced income. For example, we can see here the tax treaty between the UAE and Thailand. There is a clause here on dependent personal services. It says remuneration derived by a resident of a contracting state, in this case the UAE, in respect of an employment exercise in the other contracting state, in this case Thailand, shall be taxable only in the first mentioned state if the recipient is present in the other state, so in Thailand, for a period or periods not exceeding the aggregate 183 days within any 12-month period. So this is very important, because if you're a resident of the UAE, it essentially gives you protection via a lot of these double tax agreements that they have with many countries. So as long as they have a clause like this with a country where you're spending time, even if you perform locally sourced work in that country, in Thailand, this double tax agreement essentially prevents Thailand from taxing that income unless you spend that more than 183 days in the country. Again, this is not tax advice. This is just an example. So you need to look at where you're resident and where you spend time. Do they have a tax agreement like that? Is there a clause like this? Because obviously it might not have that. It might have a different days requirement, things like that. If you don't have that, then you need to be a lot more careful, because then technically any work that you perform, even for one day in some country, might be technically taxed by that country. Now, in practice, if you go to Thailand for 1 month or you go to Panama for 1 month, in practice, has it ever happened that they're going to enforce this and actually like, oh, you need to pay tax on this 1 month of salary that you're on? Like in practice, they're not going to do that. No one's going to enforce this. So you don't really need to worry about this too much. But technically, if you spend significant time in a country, then technically you should be paying taxes on any money that you receive personally while working in that country, if they have these rules of taxing locally sourced income for non-residents, which they often do. So step number 4 is to avoid triggering a permanent establishment. So what a permanent establishment usually is, and not every tax law has this, so again, you need to look at the specifics, is some kind of permanent place of business that that company has in some other country. So this can be like an office or a branch or something, which most likely you're not going to have, so you're not going to trigger that. But permanent establishment can also be triggered even if there is just some person in that country that habitually does work for that business. So let's say you live again in Thailand for the entire year, you yourself as the director actually doing work and conducting business for that company would trigger a permanent establishment, and now that company would be dragged into the tax net of the country where you spend time. And often it's not exactly defined, okay, what is enough time, what is enough work to trigger habitual work done or to trigger permanent place of business. So this is very, very ambiguous here. So you just want to be careful and be on the safe side and just do as little work as possible in any given country to make sure that if anyone were to ever ask, which obviously they most likely never will, if anyone were to ever ask, you can plausibly claim that it wasn't a permanent place of business, there wasn't habitual work being done. However, this is again where those tax treaties can become very useful, because another clause of this tax treaty between the UAE and Thailand actually defines more concretely what can trigger a permanent establishment. So it first defines that a permanent establishment shall include specifically like a place of management, branch, office, blah, blah, blah. You probably wouldn't have those, right? But here it has this clause where the term permanent establishment likewise encompasses the furnishing of services, including consultancy services for an enterprise through employees or other personnel in the other contracting state. So this is the place where you have the danger of triggering permanent establishment, having employees like yourself performing activities for that company in the other country. However, it actually limits it here to say for period or periods aggregating more than 6 months. So again, if you have this UAE company, UAE resident, you can again use this tax treaty to limit what is going to be treated as a permanent establishment. So according to this tax treaty, if you spend less than 6 months doing work for that company in that country, that company is not going to have a permanent establishment, again in this case in Thailand. And again, you need to look at the specifics of where you spend time. Is there a tax treaty? Is there a clause like this that defines it? If it's not clear, I would say usually from what I know, if you spend, let's say 2 months, 3 months doing work for a company in some other country, that's not going to be treated as a permanent establishment. But this is again not tax advice. You need to speak to an advisor, everything like that. So that is how you can actually fully legally use a UAE company with Dubai as a base for just enough time to become tax resident, to then not be taxable in any other country where you spend time. Now, obviously, the next question people are going to have is, okay, how long do you actually have to spend in the UAE to get this tax resident, to get 0% taxes legally for yourself personally, and to then obviously get protection from these double tax agreements in these cases where they might matter. And I made a detailed guide on exactly how long you actually need to spend in the UAE to become a tax resident, and you can watch that video right here. So watch that video next, and I will see you in the next one.